Hello, everyone, and hi, David. Actually, first question, DHH or David? What do you prefer?
David is good.
Nice. Okay, so we stay with David. Yeah, just to give some context, this is the first remote talk we've ever done at Code Talks, and also for the both of us doing a fireside chat. So be nice with us. And we're also, I just told Mihri and everyone who wanted to hear it, that I've literally never been this nervous before anything I've done on stage before. But let's get into that. And to start, we thought we introduce us a little bit, just to really kick. And then I think there's been, you can't see the people, but there's a ton of people here. And I think everyone knows you. Maybe you just want to say one or two sentences, because I've seen a bunch of interviews with you, and usually I feel the people underrepresent or sometimes don't represent what you're doing correctly, and I think it would be easier or better if you do that. And yeah, that we're just getting started with the fireside chat, and Mihri and me thought it would be a good idea to maybe do something different and actually talk about some of the topics we have here on the keynote stage at Code Talks, because you're known to be a very critical thinker and getting debunking BS and having open opinion and sharing your opinion very openly about that stuff. And that's would be something new as far as I saw on other interviews that you've done in the past. Usually they are very, yeah, I think not so much out there, and this is we want to try something different. Maybe you can start with introducing yourself, David, and then Mihri and me will go ahead and do that as well.
Sure. So I'm David Heinemeier Hansson. I am the creator of the Ruby on Rails framework. I've been developing web applications since the early 2000s. I am the CTO and co-owner of 37 Signals, the company that makes both the Basecamp, a project management tool, and Hey.com, an email service. And then I've also written a bunch of books over the years. Rework, It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work, Remote Office Not Required, Getting Real, and been involved with the Shape Up software development methodology. I also race cars, and I love to program the Ruby programming language, and I love to get involved with discussions about technology and business and organizations.
Cool. Yeah. So hi, everyone in the room, and hi, David. I'm Mihri. I'm originally coming from Turkey, and yeah, my background is software engineering. In the last 14 years, I developed apps that were used by millions of people. And now at Beams, we are helping tech employees focus at work.
And Mihri is also CTO and co-founder of Beams.
Yeah, Beams, yeah.
Put that in there. That's why I asked her, because I think the entrepreneurship side of what David is doing is I just thought she might have some very interesting questions. I also founded a company, but she's right in there at the moment, funding and everything. So that would be fresher memories. Yeah. So I'm Martin. I also a software developer. I consider myself still a software developer also, even though I didn't do that much software development since I started my last company. I was at About You first. I did the Code Talks. And now at the moment, I'm doing this fun project, Code Talks again. And yeah, I think that's more to us, and let's get started with the questions. And I think the first thing that I wanted to ask you is, it's very confusing, the camera stand and you are down there, but we'll figure it out. So the first question I wanted to ask is related to your critical, critical thinking of mainstream hypes, where people are oh, this is cool, let's do this, and then usually after a few days or weeks, there's a post from DHH coming to no, I think this could work. I think there should be something, or maybe don't jump onto it right away. And I wanted to ask you, first, how long does it take for you, or what does it take for you to have some technology or an idea or something, someone approaches you with some new thought, and how is the thought process for you on to evaluate if you should look into that? How do you build your own opinions on something new? Because you're I think that's always very based in a lot of critical feedback, but it's never just, I don't like it. It's always very thought out in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there is a absolute pandemic of knee-jerk reactions in the tech world and in programming world in particular, where people give something about 30 seconds before they decide they either hate it or they love it. And I don't think that's actually a really helpful way of evaluating technology or even getting to know yourself and what you like. So if you take two of the most recent controversies that I've been involved with, the move out of the cloud and the move to go away from TypeScript. Both of those two decisions were based on at least 5 years of exposure to that camp. At 37 Signals, we've been working with TypeScript, for example, for many years. We'd been in the cloud for even longer. So I had ample opportunity to really understand the pros and the cons about these technologies, figure out what worked for us, why it didn't work for us. And then once I've reached my decision, based on all of this, I don't have a problem expressing that. I think actually this is one of the wonderful things about technology and programming, that there are so many people who are interested in engaging with ideas and with concepts and staying at that high rung of the debating ladder. Unfortunately, of course, there's also the low rung of the debating ladder where someone takes it as a personal offense if we're moving out of the cloud or we don't like TypeScript or any of these other controversies that, from my perspective, are sort of interesting controversies. Like, why is it controversial that some company, for example, runs the accounting numbers on how much it costs to rent servers versus buy those servers, and decides it is far more profitable to buy the servers than it is to rent the servers? Now, I can go into why that is controversial, because programmers and technologists have this sense, as do many other professions, I'm sure, of identifying with their choices. That is not just, I choose to use the cloud or I choose to use TypeScript. It is, I am a cloud professional. I am a TypeScript programmer. And when someone then expresses an opinion that's counter to that, it feels like a personal attack. Now, in my opinion, that is really a quick way to close your mind to any new ideas, to be unable to wrestle with countering opinions, with concepts that you're either not familiar with or have a reaction to. If we take the TypeScript example, which is the most recent, lots of fireworks around that. I don't have anything against static typing per se. I just spent quite a while diving into the Swift programming language, thought that was a wonderful experience, but I simply prefer dynamically typed languages. I prefer writing most of my code in Ruby. That is a way of engaging with these topics and the wonderful diversity we have in the programming world, where we have so many different choices, so many different programming languages and paradigms to choose from. We could have, instead of static typing, we could have talked about object-oriented programming versus functional programming. That is just as much of a hot button issue where people have adopted identities around these things. And it's just, do you know what? That's a sad way to live, in my opinion. Expand your mind a little. Find what you like and appreciate that others like other things, and that the world is more interesting when we don't all enjoy the same things the same way.
That's very very good answer. I would think that's basically also how I would see that. And then maybe because you're like very busy, right? And there's like a lot of technology out there. Like, what's the barrier to clear for anything? Like, how do you decide what you get into? Like, for example, recently I saw that I think Bun, that's like a new JavaScript framework, has a lot of, I'm not sure if I want to say hype, but it's like, it's very hot right now, right? And
yes.
And I like looked into it for like 2 or 3 days now, and it looks really cool, but I don't know, like, you don't have that much time. And so how do you build like your opinion on how to get into which topics, you know?
So Bun for me was an easy one because I saw the advantages being primarily around speed. One of the developments in the JavaScript world that I'd been excited about that came out some time ago was ESBuild. And ESBuild was just dramatically faster as a way of packaging and bundling JavaScript than Webpack that we were using before, or any of these other things. So it wasn't so much I had to adopt a new paradigm or I had to turn an idea around in my head. It was just like, oh, plop, ESBuild goes into the pipeline. The pipeline takes less than a second instead of 15 seconds. That is just such a clear win that it doesn't require a lot of sort of analysis on my part to figure out that that's better. And Bun provided some of those similar advantages when it came to replacing Yarn or PNPM or any of these other bundler install things. So when things fit inside existing paradigms, that to me is easy. You can just evaluate it on the metrics on the box. Now, that being said, I haven't dived that deep into Bun. I haven't even sort of thought about, oh, should we convert our stuff with it? It just looks like this is incremental progress that seems good. Cool, let's support it. It fits within the paradigm. I'll give you another example, though. AI has more hype than probably anything we've had in the technology industry in the past 20 plus years. I can look at that and I can appreciate it. And then I've also not voiced my opinion barely at all, because AI is still so new and it's so uncertain what the fundamental benefits are going to be. Like, I use ChatGPT as anyone else as part of my programming workflow, as an easier way to use the internet, as an easier way to look up questions, as an easier way than using Stack Overflow or whatever. But I am in absolute no position to pontificate on what does this mean in 5 years? Are there even going to be programmers? I don't know. And if I don't know, and I don't feel like I have the sort of fingers in the mold of it enough, I just don't opine on that. That's also totally fine. I think this is one of the diseases of social media, is that there's the pressure that we have to have an opinion about everything all the time 5 seconds after it's been released. Mm-hmm. No, you don't. You can also just shut up, sit back, and enjoy the show.
Yeah. I don't know if you heard the laughs, but there was a lot of agreeing laughs to that. Okay.
Yeah. So also, like, coming back to the stage here at Code Talks, we also had a talk about self-hosting and providing 24/7 availability for your clients. You already addressed that you moved to cloud service. We read about it, that what made this decision, and you also mentioned how you came up with this decision now. But I want to understand, from the perspective of clients, you delegate that, especially as an early stage startup. We need to focus on the product, but we cannot, cloud services be used now. And there can be a time, and I would like to understand what was that time for you, and also what was the reaction of your clients in terms of this SLAs, SLOs, this, being responsible from that, not delegating it to the Amazon or Google.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. First of all, I'd say, I think the cloud has been a wonderful development in a lot of ways. It's opened our minds to different ways of packaging software. It's pushed forward virtual machine technology. There's so many good things that's come of it that are separate from the fundamental business decision of whether you want to rent or buy the computers that run your services. If you're early in your company's history and you don't even use enough computing power to fill one computer, you should absolutely be in the cloud. It makes no sense whatsoever to buy expensive machinery, except if you have specific data concerns, which are a growing concern, and we can talk about that too, GDPR and so forth. But just on the technical merits and the business merits, if you're not yet using the capacity of a full computer, it totally makes sense to share that computer with someone else and get it at a discounted rate. As soon as you start having an application that uses multiple machines completely, that's when the calculation of whether to rent or buy your machines becomes really pertinent. Now, to the questions about availability, I think that's a really interesting one, because this was part of the pitch for the cloud, that if you went to the cloud, you just didn't have to worry about operations at all, and nothing could be further from the truth. This was one of the realizations that literally took years for us to internalize. The fact that moving to the cloud did not mean we could have a smaller operations team. It did actually not mean that they had fewer incidents to address. In many ways, it meant that they had more incidents to address, that less of the planning was in their hands, that very often when you are on these services, you have to react. Amazon RDS is doing an update on March 29th at noon. And that's just it. You don't get to choose, we had vacation there. Too bad. You got to be around to do that, right? So you lose some of your autonomy over the planning decisions. And overall, in my opinion, once you reach this bar of you have multiple computers and you have a lot going on, it is no easier to be in the cloud. You are no more assured reliability. In fact, we ran the A/B experiment for a long time. We had some of our services in the cloud and we had some of our services on-prem. Our on-prem services had far better uptime, more nines, more sort of continuous service. So it was easier for us to fulfill SLAs when we were running on our own servers. And that really shouldn't be that much of a surprise. Running a cloud hyperscaler is really complicated. There is a million moving parts, and they have to balance the needs of thousands of customers. When you own your machine, it's a lot easier. Now, all of the work, or most of the work, falls to you, so it can appear as though it's more complicated. But if you look like a network diagram of a hyperscaler, for example, you'd go like, holy shit, I need an advanced degree in network engineering and a PhD on top of that to even understand the topography of this network. You look at our network diagram for the servers, we have the 8 racks, like a layman can understand that. So there's just these orders of magnitude and complication in difference between these two things that in our direct experience means that you have more outages when it comes to hosting things in the cloud than if you do it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I have a follow-up question actually on that. But first, I would like to remind everyone there is a QR code up there. And if you want to ask any questions later, like we will include them if they fit into like the flow of the conversation. But in general, if you ask via our Discord server and the Discord channel, just go ahead and we will like pick out the ones that we will also include in the fireside chat. Maybe to just like follow up on that, because I think the main thing that I would like be concerned with like doing something like having a server that I have to like maintain and everything. I agree that I think like if there's not by accident, there's not a lot of people that do a profession on like hosting this stuff and like introducing like companies to like this cloud services and all of that. So, but the main thing that I would consider is that scalability is obviously like an issue, and especially like when we worked at About You, we always had like before every bigger marketing campaign, we had like these upfront meetings where we're like, okay, so how much traffic do we expect? How do we do that? And like, it was so much easier after we moved to the cloud. And that's a big company that's like, I'm not sure like what the API calls per like seconds is, but like, and after the cloud move, it was like, oh yeah, we have like, we have our systems in place, and now it should be like we still monitored it and so on. But how do you address that problem?
I think that's a great argument for the cloud. If you have wild swings in your usage, if you have 100x swings that you go from, when we just run normal, we need 1 machine or 2 machines, and then suddenly something happens and we need 100 machines, nothing will beat the cloud. The fact is, the vast majority of certainly of SaaS companies, they don't have those kind of swings. They might have 2x swings or 3x swings or something else like that, where you're at the scale where buying the excess capacity for your own fleet of servers is so much cheaper still. This was one of the things that really just blew my mind, that we were able to save literally millions of dollars a year buying far more capacity. And I think this is one of the areas where the half-life of truth becomes a factor. If you looked at this in 2014, 2015, machines had a certain capacity, right? If you look at that in 2023, the machines we just bought from Dell, they have like 192 vCPUs in them. Just an absolutely staggering amount of computing power in one U box. So the ability to get headroom and capacity to handle small spikes or even large spikes, but not enormous spikes, is incredibly much easier today. And this is one of those areas where cloud has now been around for long enough that some of the early advantages of the cloud have kind of dissipated. The same thing with cost. When we first started evaluating the price of renting servers from Amazon, for example, in 15, 16, the pricing actually looked quite reasonable. The reason it looks so unreasonable today is that the advantage in technology has not been passed on as savings. The cost to rent Amazon computing power has absolutely not followed the cost curve of buying computing power, which is, of course, why AWS is making such unfathomable amounts of money, why they have profit margins of 30 or 40%, even though they have extreme investments into new data centers, because they've been able to reap that split. So computers, especially in the last 3 to 4 years, have just gotten dramatically cheaper, dramatically faster. The same thing goes for storage. And those savings haven't been passed on. So I'd say for people who are worried about the scaling spikes, first quantify. What are we talking about? Are we talking about 1 order of magnitude, 2 orders of magnitude, not even an order of magnitude? I'm quite confident saying that if you are dealing with less than an order of magnitude, I'm very suspicious if the cloud is going to pan out on paper. If you're dealing with 2 orders of magnitude, no doubt about it, you should be on the cloud, certainly for the spikes. This is the other thing. You can go higher. You can buy the baseline and rent the spike, is a sort of saying, which is a totally fair way to do it. And it may also be that it just doesn't matter. Now, this is the other thing. If you are a company where the costs associated with this are just immaterial compared to everything else, like it just doesn't matter. You're not spending that much money on it. Maybe it is easier for you, all the more to you. For us, we were spending $3.2 million last year on cloud services. That's really money. I co-own this company. If we spend $1 million less, I get to share that $1 million with Jason. To me, that's real money. I don't know about you, but $1 million still matters at the end of the year to me. So that's part of it too. When you're spending other people's money, it's a big corporation. Who cares if it's twice as expensive or 3 times as expensive? If you're spending your own money or your own runway, suddenly it matters.
Okay, thank you. That was really good. I had the same thought of mine, but it's like that was weird. I think I will just answer. We'll follow up with the next topic that we had on our list, and then because I think it kind of relates to. So this morning. Hila opened our program at Code Talks on the main stage with a small dive into quantum computing. And I think especially to that, it does connect very well to cloud computing, because you can't run a quantum computer in your garage, right? So my question would be, did you have any touch points? Do you have an opinion? Also, it's super fine if you like you said, I didn't dive into it. Let's move on to the next question.
Yeah, I think quantum computer to me falls even further into the camp of just lean back, shut up, and watch what's happening from people far smarter than me. I see the prospects of it, but I've also heard those same prospects for, I think, maybe 10, 12 years. Hey, as soon as quantum computing is real, for example, all of encryption is out the window. That's basically sort of the main risk factor I have in my head, that when that happens, all encryption has been broken. And that's just interesting, but it's also something I know absolutely nothing about, so I try not to pontificate on those things. But to the point about renting, I think that's also a good one. There's another perhaps more direct example for a lot of companies. If you want an NVIDIA H100, you can't buy one. Literally, NVIDIA is only selling these cards that are highly desirable for machine learning and AI development to a select outlet. So you have to rent those things. And I think that's a great use of rentage, especially on something like an H100 card, or if you need 500 of them for a short amount of time. Why would you buy that for a sprint like that? Use the cloud, please. And I think there are opportunities like that when there's new technology that you might just need a little bit of, or you need a little bit for an intensive period of time. That could be quantum computing when that's ready. And it certainly is already H100 cards and other AI tooling. Great use of the cloud. And then leave all the mundane stuff that we've had decades of experience figuring out to the question of whether to buy it or not.
Okay, so moving to another great talk happened here at the main stage already from your colleague, actually. Ryan Singer was with us, and he also had a talk here.
Is Ryan here? Ryan, are you here? Are you listening? He doesn't. See. No, he's not. I also don't see anything. So.
Yeah, so that was a great talk, and it was about the shape up. And just there was a question here, and I want to bring it to here as well for you. So the question was that who is joining shaping sessions at your company? So if you can tell us like who is this personas there, and then after the session, how does this spread into the rest of the team, and the alignment happens there?
Yes. So the majority of the shaping that's done at 37 Signals is done by Jason Fried, my business partner, the CEO, and our chief designer at the company, together with Brian, who works in product strategy. So it's basically the two of them that originate and capture the majority of it. And then as soon as that shape is in a semi-complete state, it gets posted to a group that includes myself. It includes several team leads that we have for both mobile and for web. Some of our senior designers will give input on that shaping document, help refine it from the 80% down to 100%, so that it's a shaping document that's ready to go, as we like to say, that it's been prepared enough that we could bring it to what we call the betting table, which is where we decide which of these pitches go into the next cycle. So it is sort of like a two-phase situation. Actually, it's a three-phase situation. First, we have the majority of pitches being prepared by Jason and Brian. It moves into this larger group. Input and feedback is probably a thing Ryan talked about as well, that good shaping documents require direct knowledge about the materials you're working with. You can't shape in a vacuum. You can't just shape in Figma. It has to be connected to someone who actually has to build it, because they can give you the constraint, they can give you the feedback on what's easy, what's hard. Then once it goes through that phase and it revives as done, as a complete pitch, it moves to the betting table, where the betting table is predominantly done by Jason, Brian, and myself, just three people, that does the final decision of what are we actually going to build. So I think this is something we have now at our scale. If you have a smaller company, these hats will be not between separate people. You might have someone who doesn't just do product strategy, for example. We're big enough now that there are enough shaping documents being produced between cycles that we need someone who focuses on that more or less full time. But in smaller companies, that's not necessarily the case at all.
I have a follow-up question for that, actually. And I see the question. I like to really, I will ask them in a second. But I talked to Ryan because he was at another event that I was part of as well. And I got his side of like how you started with like Shape Up. And I think he's also like obviously talking very much about that. But I wanted to get your side, like how did you experience that back then? He's talking about like you didn't really use like Scrum, right? Like, and so coming up with this new way of creating products and like doing like just working together, right? That, how did you experience that? Because I find it, a lot of people don't do that. You know, they like, that's a solved problem, right? Like project management, doing stuff is a solved problem.
Yeah, absolutely it is not. Or at least if it is a solved problem, a lot of the solutions are really poor. I think Scrum falls into that bucket. Now, there are people who make Scrum work. No denying that. This is part of why this is difficult, because we're dealing with social sciences here. There's an absolute replication crisis when it comes to software methodology, that you have software methodologies being used by teams to great success. Then you have ostensibly the same methodology used by different teams, and they get very different results. So I think part of that is because the key ingredients is humans. And humans are just invariably variable. And therefore, it becomes very hard to come up with something like a software methodology that could be repeatable in the same way a production line method can be repeatable, or a mechanical design can be repeatable. Humans are just not that fudgeable. They are quite unique in that case. I think the main origin story that's interesting for me around Shape Up is the way that we had high collaboration from the very first moment at 37 Signals between designers and programmers. I've seen a lot of shops that are programmer driven. And if you look at the history of the Agile development movement, the Agile Manifesto and all the writings around that, it was very programmer driven. There were nary a designer input to be had. Maybe in the early days you had like a user story analysts, and that was kind of what they called designer. Well, the designer role at 37 Signals from the get-go was person who decides how the thing should work and how those flows should be, and designs it in HTML and CSS. So when you have people with the capacity to both envision how something should work and design the flows and layouts on it, you end up with something very different. It's funny, we used to, Ryan, Jason, and I hosted a series of workshops back in 2004, 2005, shortly after we had made Basecamp. That was called The Building of Basecamp. And I posted a picture from one of those slides that says, the screens are the software. This idea that you start by designing the screen, and the actual screen, not the Figma thing, not the Photoshop thing, but the actual screen, and that is what governs what the software should do. It's quite different from if you look at earlier iterations of software methodology development, or even how a lot of people do today. They do it with tickets. They don't elaborate on, we should add feature to product. Okay, what does feature mean? How should it look? How many screens should it have? What are the trade-offs? Very often, those decisions are just completely delegated to whoever picks up that ticket. And the results are as follows. A lot of shitty software is built by people who don't really understand the problems and haven't interrogated the solution space. That is what the shaping process is, that you sit together with designers and programmers and you actually figure out what's the shape of this. That's where that word comes from, right? Like, what is the shape of this? What are the key trade-offs? And then delegate the final decision-making. We don't write things into fine detail. We leave a lot of the autonomy to the team implementing, but there is an understanding. What is even the problem we're trying to solve? And I find that that's often missing from a lot of other software methodology approaches. They don't even treat the design phase as something important. That's like, oh, that's a customer thing or input. No, that's a skill. And if you get better at that skill, you can produce better software faster.
Okay, I think that really gets a lot of people more into the shape up idea, and I think it really wrapped up really well what I understood as far from Ryan, what he's always talking about on shape up. Do you want to do the audience question?
Yeah, but how do I see the most upvoted ones?
We don't have any there.
Okay. So yeah, this question comes to you. Racing or coding?
Both, absolutely both. This is one of the wonderful things about not dedicating your life exclusively to work, that you actually have spare time and free hours to pursue your hobbies. I can highly recommend getting a proper hobby to drag you away from work. Now, I love programming tremendously, and there have been times, still are times, where that is exclusively what my brain is focused on. But I find my brain flexes better, it works better, when that's not what I do all the time. Race car driving is one of the things I enjoy so much because it actually overlaps with programming in the sense of chasing flow, this state where you lose track of everything else and you're completely engrossed in an activity to the point of forgetting how long it's been or whatever. That to me is as pure as we can get to this moment of happiness, these fleeting moments we have in our lives where things seem just right. I get that moment occasionally from programming. I get it almost every time I close the race car door and go 200 miles an hour and could potentially die if I do it wrong. So it is just a great focusing function to really narrow in on something. But the broader point for me is to make sure that your life is not just all eggs in one basket. Have multiple baskets. There will be ups and downs in your career as a programmer. I guarantee it. You may lose your job. You may hit a dead end on some technology. And if that is all you are, your entire identity is wrapped up. I am a programmer, even worse. I'm a TypeScript programmer, or I'm a whatever programmer. It all crumbles and falls apart if that thing hits hard times. You need multiple pillars of support to be able to make it through this life in good physical and mental condition. So highly recommend getting a hobby, especially a physical hobby. I know for some programmer that seems like a foreign thing, but whatever it is, involving something, look at it this way. Just look at the scientific data on what physical activity does to the brain. That should be enough argument on its own. You will increase your computing power by flexing your muscles. It is literally that simple. The connection is that straight. Not only will it increase your cognitive capacity, it'll actually make you happier. There are numerous studies saying that regular physical activity beats medication. If you are depressed, and who among us are not depressed occasionally, sometimes about all the shit that's wrong in the world, right? Just go work out.
Cool.
Okay, I actually have another follow-up question on that. But maybe first, and then I think that's not so much a question, or maybe we can keep the answer short. Someone wrote, first of all, thanks for Ruby on Rails. I use it every day and love it. Really appreciate your work. How many days/hours a week are you still working on the Rails project itself, and how and to push it forward? And maybe also connected to that, I think I saw that RubyCon is coming up, right? Like I think you recently posted about that. Yeah, I think this adds to the question, like how much time do you actually get to spend on that stuff?
Yeah, so it's Rails World, and it's coming up in Amsterdam next month. It's going to be great. We celebrate 20 years of Ruby on Rails, which is just incredible in itself in this technology age where things seem to churn all the time. I spend a very variable amount. Sometimes I go extremely deep on it, and it's the only thing I think about for a certain amount of time. The last major release of Ruby on Rails, Rails 7.0, had a huge amount of changes on how we work with the front end. We went to import maps. We moved away from bundling, all these things. That took literally months of work that all went into the Ruby on Rails framework that I was driving myself. Then earlier this year, I got really excited about getting out of the cloud, and I realized we needed some tooling to do that. I built a deployment tool called Kamal. It's Kamal, KAMAL-deploy.org. And it's a tool that I extracted out of this. And part of doing that, I needed to make Rails fit better, had better defaults such that you could do Rails new application, and then 1 second later, you could do Kamal deploy. And boom, you'd have your application running in the cloud. That required some changes to Rails, and I made those changes. We have default Docker files now. We have default configurations that are really good. So it is really waiting and reacting. There will sometimes be 6 months. I don't touch the Rails code at all. You'll see just a complete flat line in commits because I have other things that I'm focusing on. Maybe we're developing a new product or so forth, which is actually perhaps the main way I move the framework forward is when we develop something new that Rails can't quite do, and I need to build some new tools. I get really excited, go away, build those tools for a long time, and then I come back to Rails and I put all those tools in. Hey.com, our email service, was exactly this. We put in several new frameworks, active storage, action text, all these things got into Rails because we were building a new product that needed them.
Okay. One question on that is, why did you focus on deploying it to the cloud first? Because I think in general, like we already had like the discussion about that, but like because then like it's easier for the people to adapt it, right? You don't need to go out and buy a server, but that's the reasoning for that? Or like why did you focus on like doing Kamal first for the cloud? And maybe are you planning to do that like for like bare metal, like I put a server and then I connect it and then I somehow set a container up for that as well?
So we actually built Kamal for deploying on our own hardware. That was the original thing, but that's the magic of what's happened with the cloud. The technology that the cloud uses is not the same technology you use when you own your own servers. So we run KVM that takes large boxes and slices up into VMs, and then we run Docker on top of those, which is exactly the same technologies as you would use in the cloud. So that is the magic of Kamal. The magic of Kamal is if you use it from the beginning, you can deploy it to the cloud when you're not yet using whole computers, and it's better to rent them. And then when there's a tip-over point, when it no longer makes sense to rent servers, you can use exactly the same setup to point Kamal at your own servers and deploy it there. That is one of the key problems with the cloud, the lock-in. We spent quite a lot of time getting out of that login. Kubernetes kind of has a feel, oh, it's all portable. No, it's not. It is not portable. You cannot take I have not heard of anyone who could take their entire application, make no changes at all, and move it from AWS to GCP or to their own servers. Kamal actually gets much, much closer to that promise that whether you're deploying on cloud or whether you're deploying on your own servers, it's the same technology, it's the same configuration. There's very little to change. That's what I'm so excited about because I know I'm not going to convince startups to go out and buy a ton of servers. That, first of all, would just be a bad idea. They're never going to do it. Every single startup from here on out, they're all going to start in the cloud, again, except if they have the specific data concerns around GDPR and so on. They're all going to start in the cloud. What they need is an exit strategy. The exit strategies for cloud currently suck. It is so hard, and it doesn't need to be. So if you think of the exit strategy up front and you use something like Kamal, then you have choices by the time it makes sense to depart the cloud.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Maybe this is one of the last questions, or the last question, maybe.
Yeah, I think we can maybe do like 5 more minutes, and then it's fine.
If you have time, yeah. What's your take on open source, and what is happening with frameworks like Terraform?
Well, in general, I owe my entire career to open source. I owe my entire business to open source. I owe my love of the internet to open source. So open source is just ingrained in who I am and what I love to do. I love the sharing of it. I love expanding the commons. I think it is one of the great wonders of the world. And it is hilarious when you look back upon the debates we have in the late 90s, where people were talking about open source as being a cancer, and this was against capitalism. It was basically freaking communism. And you just go, how wrong these people were. Open source has enabled more capitalism than we know what to do with. And we should be ever so grateful for the fact that we just discovered this way of working together and sharing. So open source to me is absolutely fundamental. It's instrumental. It's baked into the internet, and we need to carry on with that. Terraform is one example of it. Even things that I don't like particularly, or I don't want to use. I shouldn't say I don't like, but that we don't use. We talked about Kubernetes for a second. It's wonderful that that's open source. Whether I want to use it or not, it means that we have choices. This is the same thing that ties the discussion to TypeScript versus JavaScript or whatever. We're all talking about open source gifts that we get to unwrap if we like them or not, and we can leave them aside if we don't like them. How glorious it is that we have so many choices, and we can find the one that's just right for us. And if we can't find the one that's just right for us, we can build it and share it with the world. Mm-hmm. It is just an absolute beautiful social construction that we should pay tribute to, and we owe the internet and most of the progress in technology to it.
Okay, I think we sadly are out of time. And I have more questions now than I had in the beginning, actually. So we do need to do this again. And either we set up a screen there, or we have to get you on stage with us, because I can't do this anymore. So yeah, I think that was our first remote session. Thank you so much for joining that with us, David. And thank you for so many people. I wish you could see that. Next time, maybe in live, and we make that work somehow, maybe. And yeah, thank you to all of you. Thank you, David, and have a great day. And thank you.
All right. Thank you. This is great.